Here is a note-taking app, and here is the code that makes it work. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to make this app using Express and EJS. This is a complete intro video on how to use Express to set up an HTTP server. So I'll be going over how to set up an Express server from scratch, but I'll also be going over some of the details of HTTP to give a complete picture of how everything works. HTTP is the protocol we use on the web to communicate between clients and servers. So you have a web server, a computer on the internet somewhere, with a server application running on it that accepts HTTP requests. In this case, the server app is going to be a Node app. Clients are things like web browsers or mobile apps. They make HTTP requests to a server to send and receive data, and the server sends a response. It always works this way. The server just sits there waiting for an HTTP request. When one comes in, it responds. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol because it was invented so that a web browser could make a request to an HTTP server and it could respond with HTML or Hypertext Markup Language. And then the browser is happy because when it receives HTML, it can display a web page. At least this is how it used to work. Now it's really common for a server to either send back HTML or send back JSON. So things like mobile apps that don't use HTML or single page web apps like ones made with React will often communicate using JSON. I'll look at setting up a JSON API with Express in a different video. In this video, we're just going to focus on how to set up an Express app that can respond with HTML that is generated by the server. So let's get started. I'm just going to create a new directory for this project. Let's call it my notes. And I'm going to open this up in VS Code. And the first thing I'm going to do is create a new file called server.js. And this is going to be the entry point into the application. So all of the server-side code will at least start in this file. And since this is a Node app, I should create a package.json file. So for this, I'm also going to open up a terminal window for my project. And I'm going to put these side by side. And I am going to, within this directory, I'm going to run npm init -y just to set up the default package.json file so that it can keep track of all my Node application dependencies, and I can add some scripts to it if I want to. So since this is a web app that's going to be using Express, I also need to install Express. And if we check back in the package.json, I can see that Express has been added to my list of dependencies. And we could set up a web server with Node without using a framework like Express, but Express makes things just so much easier. And we can look at the docs for Express. If we just Google Express, Express.js probably would be a better Google search, Sam. There we go, expressjs.com. Express is a framework. And really, it just means that we get to write much less code to create the web server application, and it's always nice to write less code. And the Express docs are pretty decent. So if you do go to this website, there is an API reference, there are guides. There's also this little getting started tab here, and I want to go to the Hello World section, because to get started, I am going to copy and paste the basic Hello World stuff in here. And before actually doing anything, I think I'm just going to run node server.js just so we can see what the Hello World code actually does. So we'll run this and it says example app listening on HTTP localhost 3000. So this looks like a URL. Let's just copy this and paste this into the browser and we can see Hello World. Just by visiting localhost 3000, we get a Hello World. That is a Hello World application. So let's walk through this code. The first line is just requiring the Express library. The second line is creating a new Express app. You'll do this for every Express application you make. Then we're creating a variable called port and we're setting it equal to 3000. If we skip over the rest here, we go down to app.listen, we can see that the port is being used when the app is listening for HTTP requests. So this is the part that actually sets up the server to start listening for those requests. And then we see this console log example app listening on localhost followed by the port. And this is just a callback function that will get called once the application is successfully listening for HTTP requests. So this is an HTTP server. It is listening for HTTP requests, just waiting for them to come in. And when we usually make a request, like in our browser and go to something like youtube.com, we are making a request to YouTube servers. And if we're using HTTP, we're using port 80, or for HTTPS, it's port 443. And that's just separated by a colon right here. And if I hit enter, the 443 goes away because by default, that is the port that will get used, so we don't see it. But what's going on is we are actually connecting to their servers on port 443. And I don't want to get into ports right now. Just know that port 80 is for HTTP, port 443 is for HTTPS. That will be important at some point. But those are privileged ports. Any port below 1024 is a privileged port. And our application, our node application, or any app that you're building as a web server app shouldn't have privileged access on the server that it's running on, because if there was any bad code in there or someone managed to hack into the web app, they would have privileged access to the entire server. So we actually have to use a port that doesn't need privileged access, so we end up using higher number ports. 3000 is a common one. I actually prefer 8080 because 3000 is used in React programming, so once you get to that, it's nicer to have different ports for things. And I'm going to move this down here just because I like it closer to the actual listening part. And it's still listening on port 3000, so I'll have to stop the server and then start it up again. Oh, I didn't save the file. Save the file, then stop the server, then start it up again. And it's now listening on port 8080. So as long as you use a high number port, anywhere between 1024 and, what is it? It's going to be 2 to the power of 16? Yeah, there we go. Okay. So anywhere between 1024 and 65,536, any of those ports are fine to use. So yeah, I'll just use port 8080. So I'm going to switch this now to port 8080. At some point in the future, when you have to deploy your app, you might have to think about this a little bit more, but for now, we'll just use 8080. So then in the middle here, we have this app.get/, and this is saying we're going to allow an HTTP GET request to come in at the root of our URL. And if a request comes in to that endpoint, we will just send back the string hello world. And this is how we can start accepting HTTP requests on our server. So I can create as many of these as I want. I'll create another one, allow a GET request for, let's just say goodbye. So you specify the path, that's going to start with a /. So if I go to my web server /goodbye, then you pass express a callback function. And this callback function passes in two parameters. Rec and res is the standard naming. This stands for request and response. So any information to do with the HTTP request will be in this object. And then anything to do with responding to the HTTP request will be using this object, the res object. So if I just want to send back a basic response here, I'll say res.send goodbye world. Why not? And since I've changed my code here, I'll have to stop and restart my server. And then if we head back to the browser and go to /goodbye now, I should see a different message, goodbye world. That sounds more morbid than I expected it to. And this is a really small amount of code to get a web app running, which is awesome. That's why we want to use something like Express. But what's going on behind the scenes is really interesting. And if we open up DevTools, and I recommend that you always have DevTools open when you are building applications, because there's so many features of this that will help you develop an application. So there's the elements page, which hopefully you've already looked at, and you can inspect a web page here in the CSS and stuff. There's also the console, which you can use for client-side JavaScript. Then there is the network tab. So anything to do with HTTP requests will appear in this tab. And as long as you have this record button on, it will start recording all the HTTP requests and you can see them coming in. So if I refresh the page here, over in my network tab, I can see that a request was made to /goodbye. So if I click on this, I can see all the information about that request. So I can see that this was a GET request to /goodbye. We got a response of 200, which is great. That means everything worked okay. And then I can see the response headers. So HTTP requests and responses have a header and a body. And the body is the type of information that you might send to the server, or the server will send back. So in this case, it's sending goodbye world in the body. And then headers are any kind of metadata about the request. So the response header is telling us that it's using Express for some reason. It's telling us the content type is HTML, and a few other bits of information. And in the request header, there's a bunch of stuff coming from my web browser. I'm going to ignore most of this stuff for now. There are a few things at some point that might be more interesting, but for now, just know that you can inspect each HTTP request right here. And I can even go to the response tab and see that this is exactly what the server sent back to the client. But we know that web browsers prefer HTML. This is just a string. It isn't marked up by anything. So we can come back in here and I could just wrap this in like a h1 tag. And then because I've changed my code, I have to restart my server. And this can be a little bit annoying, stopping and restarting the server at all times. So I recommend installing a thing called nodemon. Actually, I don't know how it's pronounced. The person who made it won't tell us how to pronounce it. But if we install nodemon, this will listen to when a change is made in our node application, and then we'll just restart the application for us. So back in package.json, I'm going to create a new script. There's a start script. So if I run npm start, there we go, npm start, it will just run node server.js. So we can just put these little scripts in here that can run for us using npm. It's just kind of a nice way of organizing how you're going to start your application and do things. So I'm going to add another script just called dev, because I wouldn't want this in my production app, but in development, I want to restart my server every single time I make a change. And in here, we can write npx. npx is something that will find the correct module for us. So because I've installed I actually installed nodemon incorrectly. I wanted to install it as a dev dependency. I'll have to go back and fix that. But I'm going to install nodemon as a dev dependency. npx will find it within my project's dependencies. So I'll say npx nodemon, go find nodemon, and run server.js using that instead of node, because then it will restart the server for me. I wonder if I just run npm I -d for dev nodemon, if it will fix that for me. Oh, it did. Okay, so it lists it as a dev dependency. This is important because on my production server, I will only install my dependencies, but in development, I want to install my dev dependencies and my normal dependencies. So yeah, you just install that as a dev dependency. Now, though, if I run npm run dev, that's how I run that script there. It should, yeah, it starts my server, and I can see example app listening on localhost 8080, but now if I just save this file, even if I haven't made any changes, it will restart my application for me, which is super handy. So I should, if I refresh the page now, yeah, it's still sending back goodbye. There we go. But I can see that it's in h1 tag, so the browser can actually render it as a header rather than just a piece of text. So let's step back for a moment, because right now we're handling GET requests and sending back HTML that I've like hard-coded into my JavaScript here. But when you start doing web dev, generally you'll start making static HTML and CSS files, maybe client-side JavaScript files that will run in the browser. And you don't need a server to view those on your computer. So I quickly just want to create a new folder right here. I'm going to call it public. And I just want to make some static files of just a HTML and a CSS file. So I've got some basic CSS here, some basic HTML that's using the CSS. I've pulled in an image from HTTP cat. I've got a header here. So just a really basic HTML and CSS setup. And if you were building this without a web server, you could just drag this into the browser, and browsers know how to just load in a file that you have on your computer, just referencing it through the file system. But if you wanted this on the internet so that anyone could see this HTML, anyone could go to your web page, you would need a web server to actually host this. You'd need a web server to accept HTTP requests coming in and respond with the HTML, CSS, and an image in this case. So in Express, this is really easy to do. If I get rid of these get endpoints that we have right here, I can use a function. So I can say app.use express.static, and I'm going to pass in the public directory here. So I put that index.html, style.css, and that image in a directory called public. So all of these are here. And I'm telling Express to serve up those static files, which means that if a request comes in to my web server that is requesting one of these files, so if I go /200.jpg or /style.css or /index.html, Express will just deliver the contents of that file back down to the client. So I don't have to write any special code to handle files or anything like that. So that should be working now. So if I go localhost 8080 / let's just test this out, 200.jpg, there we go. That serves me my image because it's in that public directory. So anything in the public directory will come back to me. So let's look at index.html. There's my web page. Let's zoom out to, I think this is the normal size. So this is an easy way of just having a static website. I'm going to clear my network logs, so I want to see what happens if I refresh this page. I can see that my browser made a request for the index.html. And here's all of the HTTP details about that request. It made the request for index.html, it was okay, and we got back this HTML. But my HTML file has an href to a style.css. So once that came into the browser then made another HTTP request to get the CSS. And my index.html also has a source tag for an actual image that exists on my server. So another HTTP request was made for that image. So just by requesting a single resource, I actually got 3 different things being requested here. And this is a really handy way of just anything that needs to be static. So things like CSS and images, you just put in a public directory, or you can name it whatever you want. I named it public, and then use express.static to just have Express send that back to the client whenever they request that specific thing. So this is cool, but this is all hard coded. So my HTML will never change. Anytime I make a request to my web server, it's always going to be this HTML. And I need this to be dynamic. And I need to be able to change this because any web app needs to be able to change what the HTML actually is. If you go to YouTube, you see the most recent videos. If you make a search, you only see videos that you searched for. So the actual HTML that you get back, the actual data you get back, is going to be different depending on what you do or how you use the web app. So in this case, we need to be able to send back HTML that has been created by the server. And we can see a little example of this. If I make another route here, I'm just going to do it the root. Rec res. If I send back just some hard-coded HTML here, h1 tags, but add in a little bit of JavaScript, so I could just say, date, for example. Let's just get a current timestamp here. And I actually need to move this above the express.static stuff, because if I make a request that meets any of the criteria of the public directory, and index.html is actually, will be the default thing if I go to the root route. If I have the express.static at the top, that will meet the criteria for that request. So I want to make sure that if I have a GET request to the root route, that this gets executed first. So I'm going to put this just at the bottom because whatever meets the criteria will get executed first. So now that I've got this at the top, if I make a request just to localhost 8080, I should see, there we go, in an H1, that is the current date and time. There we go. And if I keep refreshing, it keeps changing. And this is more what we would want in a web application. HTML that can be created on the server can be constructed in a way that can create a unique experience depending on what the user needs at that point. And we could write our entire web app like this, just writing our HTML in our JavaScript like this. But there are tools that make this a lot easier. And the one we're going to look at is called EJS. So this stands for Embedded JavaScript, and it's a templating language that, well, actually, maybe it would just be easier to see EJS in action. So the first thing I have to do is npm install EJS. Then in my Express app, I have to tell Express that I'm going to start using EJS. So this line of code looks like app.set the view engine to be EJS. Okay, so now Express knows that if I'm rendering using templates, it's going to use EJS. And then in my app.get, instead of sending back data like this, I'm going to render an EJS file. So I'm going to end up creating a file, I don't know, I think I'll call it index.ejs just for now. And this has to exist in a folder called views, because by default, EJS is going to look in the views directory. So I'm going to start by actually just dragging my index.html file into views, and I'm going to rename this index.ejs. So that is all I need to create an EJS file. Just create a file that ends in EJS and throw some HTML in it. There is nothing special going on here. This is just HTML. I'm back in my server. I am telling Express to render the index.ejs file. And now if I go to my root route, we should see that, oh no, something's not working. Oh, I'm not running my server. npm run dev. There we go. Okay, if I refresh my page, we see the HTML that we saw before, because it is just the HTML that I had before, but I now have it in an EJS file. And this means that if I go back to my views, go back into my index.ejs, I can use special EJS syntax to start writing JavaScript in here to render the HTML a little bit differently. So if I wanted to put, just like I did before, a timestamp in here, so I'm going to create maybe an h2. I can use these EJS tags, so I'll go over the tags a little bit, but for right now, I'm just going to type in, let's see, greater than, percent equals, and then date, and then percent greater than, did I say greater than, less than, I don't know, those things. So anything inside of this and this can be JavaScript. And if I have the equal sign here, it's going to evaluate the JavaScript, and whatever that evaluates to will end up in the HTML. So this will happen server-side. Now, when I make a request, it's going to run the EJS template, run the JavaScript code, replace that with just, whatever it evaluates to in this case, and that should appear in the H2 tag. So I'm going to clear the network tab here, refresh the page, and I can see it's pretty similar to before as far as the HTTP requests go, but I now have this timestamp here, and if I clear this and refresh again, it should be a different timestamp because this is being generated on the server. And if I look at my request to localhost, this is getting the EJS stuff, but the response coming back to the client is not that tag that I put in there. It's been replaced with what the JavaScript evaluated to, which in this case is just a timestamp. So that code in EJS, this is run on the server. The server handles all of this code, creates HTML, and then just sends the HTML back to the client. So the client has no idea that EJS is being used. It has no idea that I used JavaScript right here, because it just gets plain old HTML back. But on the server, we can write as much JavaScript as we want to create any HTML we want that will get sent back to the client. So there's a few different tags we can use. Let's see if I go through here. Yeah. So there's different tags that we can use here. You can see a list of them. There's really two that you need to know about in the beginning anyway. The first one is the one I just used, which looks like this. And the second one looks like this. So the first one, again, we put any JavaScript we want in the middle here, and whatever the JavaScript evaluates to, we will see in the HTML page. The second one will evaluate the JavaScript, but won't actually put anything into the HTML page for us. So, for example, I could create a for loop. Let's just create a basic one. I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus, open bracket, and then I'll put another set of EJS tags. And this isn't the prettiest syntax, but it works. And now I've created a for loop, so this isn't going to show anything in the HTML, but if I use this tag with the equal sign, I could put in basically whatever I want. So I don't know, I could even just like put in the number, right? So if I now ran this, I would just get a bunch of numbers printed out, but since this is HTML, let's do this the right way. Let's create an unordered list, right, around this for syntax. So we'll create an unordered list, then we'll loop a bunch of times. For each time it loops around, so in this case 10, I'll create a new li, and within that li, we'll just put the number, I guess. That's all. Yeah, that's fine. So now if I refresh this page, clear this out, refresh, I can see all of those numbers printed out there. And if I look at what was actually returned back to the client, there's no for loop, there's no JavaScript code. There is what was created by the server, the HTML that was created by the server, which is all of those LIs. So this can be a really powerful tool for generating whatever HTML you want. But it doesn't just stop there, because on the server, I am telling it to render this page, but I'm probably going to want to pass data from my JavaScript code here to EJS so that it can be rendered on the page. So when a user requests a page, it's very likely that I'll connect to a database, get some information, a list of information from the database, and send that back to EJS. And we can do that by passing an object to the render function. So I'm just going to create an object literal here, and I'll just give it a property. Let's call this, I don't know, number of iterations. Set this to, I don't know, 50, for example, just to show it as an example. Now, any property of this object that we pass to the render function, we can use within the EJS file. So back in index.ejs, instead of saying that I want to loop 10 times, I will loop whatever number of iterations is. So from the server, I can set this to be whatever I want. This could be based on user input or database data or like literally anything. Because this is JavaScript, we can do pretty much anything here. But I'm just going to pass in, 50 in this case. And the template will just use whatever value was set at that point. So going back, I should now see 50 items. There we go. And it just gets really easy to create whatever HTML you need for your web app. So let's start building the note-taking application. I'm going to start by creating a new route here, so we can get a page that shows all of the notes. So I'll just call this notes. So I want to be able to see a list of notes, just a bit of information about them. And then if you click on a note, you see all the information about that specific note. You can create a new note, delete a note, all those things. So we're just going to get the page that shows all of the notes. So I'll do res here. And just to start out, let's res.render a page, and I'll just call this, I guess, notes.ejs. And we won't pass anything in just yet. We'll just look at the basics here. So I'll create a brand new notes.ejs file and put that in my views folder so that it can find it. And we'll start with just basic HTML, just all notes. And I'm going to add my style.css. And my style.css file is in my public directory, which is being served statically by Express. So anytime I want to link to my CSS or any static file like an image or anything, if I just do / whatever the file name or the file path is within my public directory, it will be able to get that because I set it up in Express to actually serve up any file in there. So this is handy for a thing like CSS in this case. So I want all notes, and then just to see if this is working, just create an H1, say notes. So if I go into my web browser now, localhost 8080/notes, there we go, I can see my notes page. So now we actually want to display a bunch of notes, and in a real application, this would connect to a database, it would query for all the notes that I have, and then display those. I don't want to get into database stuff right now. So what I'm going to do is create basically a fake list of notes. I'm going to mock the kind of data that I would get back if I queried a real database. So let's create a notes array. And within this array, we'll have a note object. And each note will have, I guess, some contents, which will be a string. Let's look for some lorem ipsums. 15 funny lorem ipsum generators to shake up, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we got pirate, cupcake, cheese ipsum. What? Hipsum, office ipsum, legal ipsum, what? Online dating ipsum? Okay, let's go to cat ipsum. All right, 3 standard, let's make muffins. Let's, oh God. Ah, that's so good. Okay. How much text do I want in my thing? I'll just copy a little bit. Contents. Jeez. Okay. Awesome. All right. Let's have a title. I don't know. My note. My first note. There we go. That's better. Do we want anything else? Maybe like a timestamp. I'll do state.now. And I'm going to give these an ID, because again, if this was a database, I'd have some sort of way of identifying this, so that's just easy. And I might create 2 of these, because why not? It's a list. So we'll have note 1, note 2, my second note, timestamp. I guess they're going to be created at the same time. Contents. All right, let's copy a different paragraph. Some of these words are fantastic. God, love the ipsums. Okay, I'm getting distracted. All right, yeah, so this is, again, kind of just mimicking what I would get back from a database, because if I queried my notes database, I would get back an array of objects in JavaScript. So, cool, all right. So if I queried the database to get an array of notes, I would then pass the notes to my EJS file. Again, we do this through an object. So the key is going to be notes and the value is going to be notes. So I'm just going to use the shorthand here. I'm just going to pass it in the notes array. So in my notes.ejs, I now have access to these notes. So I need to use some tags. So I'm going to create a loop using this tag. So I'll just say notes for each note. And then close that off at the bottom here. Okay. For each note, shall we? Yeah, we should probably put this in a list since it's a list of notes. Why not? Each one is going to be an li. Cool. And in here, I don't know. Should these each have like headings? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to now use those other tags. You got to always use the tags to put into the HTML the note.title. That's going to be the title. In the p tag, I'm going to use note.contents. I think that's what I called it. Just getting the values from each note object. I'll do another p tag for, it's going to be note. Did I do that wrong? Yeah, wrong way around. Note.timestamp. And that's probably good enough for now. Let's just do it that way. Okay, cool. So we're going to loop through each note and we're going to create different tags for the different parts of the note that are passed in. If I go back now, we've got all notes. Okay, so all I should have to do is refresh the page. Syntax error. Does it tell me the line? It doesn't even tell me the line number. If the above error is not helpful, you may want to try EJS lint. Yeah, I probably do, but I don't have it and I don't want to install it right now. Okay. What? Oh, I did these the wrong way around. All right. I don't need EJS lint. I am EJS lint. There we go. There's my notes. Oh, that's a lot of text. Also don't like... Okay. Two things. I'm going to fix the CSS because I don't want the list item, like dot, whatever it's called. How the hell do I do this? God, now I have to remember CSS. Okay. List style. None. And is it... I think it's the... padding that throws it out there. Yeah, it's got a padding of 40. Okay, so let's just remove that padding. Cool. Refresh. Sweet. Okay, so we have a list, but without that list thing. So, okay, the text here. The text is too much text. I don't want to see all that text in my list. I want to see like a little truncated bit of text. And then if I click on the note, then I want to see all of the text. So in my index.ejs, again, this is not index. I got to get rid of that. Notes.ejs. This is JavaScript still. So I can write any JavaScript functions I want. I think it's substring. God, is that substring? How does substring work? JavaScript substring. No, not W3 schools. Whoops. Damn it. JavaScript substring. There we go. MDN. All right, so the start and the end. Yes, no, yeah. Okay, the start and the end. All right, so we'll go 0, and we'll do like a max length of how many characters? I don't know, 200. Sure, why not? And then I'll just do the ... at the end. Okay, let's see how that looks. Oh yeah, okay, that looks cool, right? More to read. Yay. This timestamp is also the number of seconds UTC timestamp. So I'm going to turn that into a little bit of a nicer timestamp with new date, passing that in. I said a little bit better, not much better, but there we go. Okay, so there's my notes, and the more notes I have, the more I'll see here. So that's awesome. So I'm showing a little bit of information about each note, but like I said, I want to be able to click on a note and see all of the information about it. So in here, I'm also going to create a link. So let's do href. And this is just going to be, I don't know, view more. Why not? There we go. So I now have a link. If I click view more, I want to be able to see all of the details about the note. But what do I put in the href? Because this is going to create a new HTTP request to my server, and I want it to go to a new page that shows me all the information about that single note. So I'm actually going to go over to the server now, and I'm going to create the endpoint here, and then we'll go back to notes.js and fill in the href. So if I make a app.getRequest to /notes / well, I can use the ID of the object that I have here. So if I go /notes/1, I can show all the contents about that note. If I go /notes/2, then I can show all the contents of the second note here. And this is a pretty common pattern in a URL to identify a resource and then / and then maybe use some sort of identifier to specify an individual resource. But since I don't know if it's going to be 1 or 2 or 100 or whatever, we can say : ID. I'm going to call it ID. I could literally put in anything I want here, but I'm going to use the word ID. And this will allow it to be dynamic. So any parameter passed in after notes will be accepted, and then I'll be able to grab it from the rec object. So we'll go rec res, say callback function, and within the request object, I can go params, and because I called it ID, I'll go ID. So I can grab the ID of an individual note just from the request params here. And I'm not going to do anything else just yet because I want to make sure this is working. And usually if you want to make sure something's working, a console log is a pretty good option. But in this case, I'm just going to res.send that ID straight back to the client. So once I set up the link, I just want to see that ID come back to me on the page. If I pass in 1, I'll be able to see 1 on the page. So if we just test that out now, I'm going to go localhost /note/1 in this case. And I see the 1 is right there in the corner. If I go /2, I should see 2. If I go /pancakes, I'll see pancakes there. So it's not specifying that it has to be a number. I could literally pass in anything there, but we're only going to pass in the ID of the note. So back in my EJS file, I just have to make sure that this is a GET request to /notes/ whatever the ID of the note is. So using those tags again, I'm going to pass in the note.id, oops, %, there we go. And if I refresh this page and inspect the HTML, I can see that that link goes to note/1 and the other one should go to note/2. So that is created on the server, sent back to the client. And if I click this now, I should be able to see that link takes me to 1, that link takes me to 2. So now I have a link that is going to go to the server or make an HTTP request to the server at this endpoint right here. And whatever the ID is, that will be the ID of the note. So I can use this to then find that note within my array. So I'll just use a quick function here, const note equals notes.find note, where the note ID is equal to the ID. And this is actually coming in as a string. So the ID here is a number. So before I do this comparison, I do need to convert this to a number. And to do this in JavaScript, there are many ways. My favorite way is just to add a plus prefix before it. So if I add a plus prefix operator before any value in JavaScript, it will try and treat it as a number. In this case, the string 1 will get converted to the number 1, and any number will basically get converted to an actual number. And this should get me the note. And again, just to test that this is working, I want to send this back. I don't want to do any rendering. I just want to make sure it's working. I'm just debugging things here. So now if I make this request to get note 1, I can see there's my JavaScript data. And if I did it for note 2, I'd see my second note and just the JavaScript object. So now what I need to do is create a new EJS file and pass that note, that individual note, to the EJS file. So instead of a res.send, I'll call this render, and I'm going to create a new EJS page called node.js, pass in an object where we pass in the note object, and then we'll be able to actually show that on the page. So I might just, to save time, create a new file called note.ejs. Maybe I'll name this something different actually. Single note, just to make it more obvious that this is just for a single note. Once I've selected one, that's what we'll see. So whatever the file name of the EJS file, that's what has to match in here. So I can really call it whatever I want, but I think individual note is good. So let's see, we've got the note. So in the H1 of this page, I'll actually just give it the note title, note.title. And since just the note is being passed in, I can just access the data calling note. I don't need a list. Actually don't need most of this, so I can delete most of this. I don't need to view more because I'm already on that page. And I'll keep the rest of this actually as it is, except I won't use that substring because I want to get all of the contents. Okay, that looks good. So now, should I put a back link? Yeah, why not? Let's put another href. That will just go to /notes, and I'll call this back. So that once we're on the page, we can go back to the other page, make a new request for the old page that we saw. We should just see the title, the contents, and the date on that page. Okay, so now if I click view more, let's look what's going to happen. It's going to go to this route. we'll get the individual note and then we'll render that on the single note page. So let's see what this looks like. View more. Boom, there's my note. If I go back, view to, there we go. So I can view an individual note or I can view all of my notes. Again, this is all dynamic. So if I had 100 notes, they would just still appear on this page and I'd be able to view each one individually. And if we look at this, we can see that the URL is note/2 because it's getting the second note. But if I change this to something like 3 that didn't exist or anything that's invalid, I'm going to get EJS error here because note doesn't actually exist. It's trying to read title of undefined, but it couldn't find note, so that is undefined. So we should probably handle this a little bit better, maybe with a 404 page, because a 404 status code is not found. So we can send back a 404 note not found page. So I'll start by creating a new EJS file. I'll call this, I don't know, note404.ejs. And again, title, note not found. And this is just going to be a page that we see if we couldn't find the note. We'll go to style. So I'm linking to my CSS, and I should always put a slash here so it goes to the root directory of my public folder to find my style.css. And then, I don't know, just a really basic, maybe just a header, right? Note not found, poop emoji. Yeah, there we go. And now on my server, I want to check. So it's going to try and find the note in my database. And if it can't find the note, so I'll just do a quick if no note is found, let's res.render the, what did I call it? Note404.ejs. And because we only send a single response back to the client in an HTTP request, it's always a single request gets a single response, and then the HTTP request is done. I need to not run any of my other code. I need to not run this render code. So once I render once, I'll just return. Just stop this function right here, do nothing else, just render the 404. And there's one other thing that we should do here, because the HTTP status codes do matter, they tell the client what has happened, we should manually set the status code, I think it's just set status, yeah, set status, hope this is right, I might be wrong, to 404, because by default render is just going to send back a 200, that everything was okay, everything was not okay, we could not find that note. So let's see, I'm going to open up my network tab again. And make a refresh. Nope, set status is not the function. Is it set status lowercase? I'm just guessing. I should read the docs at this point. Okay. Express set status. Maybe I spelt it wrong. I don't know. Oh, you just say status? Set status. Oh, it is just status. It's not setting the status, it's just status. Okay, that's fine, whatever, I had it wrong. So now if I refresh, nope, note404.ejs is not in my views directory. Okay, there we go. So now, there we go, yay, okay. So note not found, and if I check the HTTP request, it made that request, and in the headers, we have a 404 status code in the HTTP header, and my response also just has that HTML. So that's a much nicer thing. So if I type in anything that can't be found here, pancakes again, I don't know why pancakes, note not found, but if I try to get note 1 exists, so it can actually give us note 1. Back here, we have all the notes. This is all working pretty well so far. There's just one thing I want to refactor, because I'm basically faking a database here just so I don't have to actually connect to a database right now. And this is something I will actually do in my applications when I'm trying to build out the web server part, because I don't want to connect to a database in the beginning. I just want to get my JavaScript or JSON or just like whatever within my web server working, and then I can connect to a database when I need an actual database, when I'm not just testing things out. So what I like to do is take this code out. So I'm going to cut this code out of here. And I'm going to create a new file, and I'll just call this database.js. And this is going to be a file that just manages my fake database for me, and then I'll replace this with like a MySQL database or Mongo or whatever. It doesn't really matter. So I'll keep all of this private in my database.js file, and then I'm just going to expose functions that I would expose if I was setting up a real database module here. So in this case, let's see, I want a function that can get the notes. And this is going to be really simple. I'll just return the entire notes array. I'd want a function that could get an individual note given an ID, and that's going to be the code I already wrote here. So we're just going to try and find the note in the database and return that. Okay, so those are the two that I have so far. And I'll also create functions for things like add note, right, where we can pass in a note object to be created within the database. Maybe we want to be able to delete a note given an ID, and I'll fill these in later. These are just things that I would want within my database module. And then I should probably export all of these so I can actually use them. Export dot that equals that. There we go. Okay. So now in my server file, I'm going to grab my fake database, require database, and then right here, when I want to get my single note, I'll say database.get note and give in the ID. And right here, when I need all of the notes, I'll say database.get notes. Okay, is that, okay, I did something wrong. Module not found, cannot find, what database? Did I not make that in the, damn it. I put the database in the views, but not the EJS thing. Okay, there we go. All right, so database there, it can get, all right, cool. So yeah, just a small refactor just to keep that kind of like data logic out of my server JS. Otherwise it's going to get really big really quickly. So let's see, this should still work. Yep, everything still works. I can view more, I can go back. Okay, perfect. So let's add the ability to create a new note because obviously like I want to be able to create new notes in this application. And for that, I'm going to need a new page with a form where I can input a title, input the contents, and actually send that back to the server. So the first step is to render a page that actually has that form in it, and then send that data to the server so that it can be stored in my database. So first thing I'm going to do is create a route called app.get, I don't know, create note. Why not? Rec res. And this is going to be super simple because I'm just going to render a new HTML page that has a form on it. So I'll call this, I guess create note is not a bad name for the file. So now I need, let's see, a new create note.ejs file in the views directory. I might just copy and paste so I get all the default stuff. Let's call this create note and create note. There we go. And in here, standard HTML form, get to all that stuff later. So I'll need, let's see, an input type text that is going to be for, let's see, the title, and we'll need another one. Actually, this should be a text field, I guess, for the content. So text or a text area, whatever. Oh, I do not want to input all this stuff. Yeah, that's fine, whatever. And then a button of type submit. So when we submit the form, we're going to create note. And then in here, I'm also going to add some labels. So let's go label title, label contents. Oh, that doesn't sound good. Whatever, that's fine. Okay, there we go. And then I got my button. Okay. And VS Code gave me some kind of like auto-completed stuff here that I've been ignoring a little bit. So let's start with title, because there are a few important things that we want. So if I have a label and an input, the label has a form parameter that will link to an input's ID. So I'll call this title input, I guess. And then I'll put whatever the ID is of the input in the for the label. So now these two are connected to each other. And all of this stuff is just local. It's just what the browser sees and nothing else. Like the server never sees this stuff. But the name of an input, this is really important because the server, when this data gets sent to the server will see whatever I put in the input field and it will see the name. This is how it will identify the data. So I'm going to call it title. All right, so this is server-side stuff, what will get sent to the server, and this is all just HTML stuff. So same over here, I'll say contents, input, give it an ID, same ID, and then the name. So I guess I'll just call this contents. And now a title and a contents should get sent to the server when I submit this form. And this isn't complete yet, but let's see, what did I do the route? Create note. Okay. So if I go to /create note, there's my, oh God, let's just write a tiny bit of CSS. Just a tiny bit. Let's do form, display, flex direction, column. That should be enough to make it look, okay, that's fine. I'm fine with that. So I now have the title, I now have the contents, and when I submit, I want to get that sent to the server, the title and the contents. So back in, let's see, let's close some of these. Back in my create note EJS, I need to have this form send the data to the server. So the action is going to be the route that I send it to. So if I have the server.js open again, in this case, the route was create note, but I'm going to make a new request to actually send the data from the form. And this is going to be a post request, not a get request. And this is because get requests can't contain an HTTP body, and get requests should never modify anything on the server, should never modify a resource. And we can see this in the HTTP method spec. If you're interested, let's see, there it is, w3.org, safe methods. So the server should not generate side effects as a result of performing a GET request. So if there's side effects like creating a resource or deleting or anything, modifying, you cannot use a GET request, or you shouldn't use a GET request. There's nothing stopping me from, modifying resources. Like, this is just JavaScript. I can modify resources here. But to be a good developer, we should create a post request for this, or accept a post request for this. So I'm going to make a post request for /notes. Create this in the standard way, rec res. And this is where I'm going to send my note data. This is where I'll handle all the stuff. So I'll fill in all the details in a little bit. For now, let's go back to the create note EJS, and I can say that the action is going to be /notes, right? We're going to make a post request to /notes, and then we have to say that the method is a post request, because by default, a form will try and send a get request. We want it to send a post request to /notes. And before we actually implement any of the logic in the server, because this is just empty right now, this will receive the post request. Let's just see what happens when we try to create a new note. So in here, I don't know, note, contents, stuff. So in the network tab, this is where I'm interested in. I'm going to click create note, and I can see that it's making a request, and the status, let's see, can I get this? Yeah, it's pending. And up at the top here, you can't really see it that well, but it's still loading. This is because every HTTP request needs a response to be complete. So this is still half of a request. It hasn't got its response yet because I didn't write any code here to respond to it. So if you see that, it's probably because you haven't responded. But if I click on notes and I look at the headers, and scroll down to the bottom, you can see the actual form data. So the title, that's the name I gave this input field, has a note, and the contents has stuff. So this is what the server is going to see. It's going to see the title and the contents. And the way it's going to see it is through the request object. The request object has a body property, and this is going to be the body of the post request. But before we can actually get the data from rec.body, because this is just going to be undefined right now, we have to tell Express that we are going to allow form data. This is URL encoded data. You can actually view the source and see this is URL encoded. We're going to allow URL encoded data to be sent to our server, and then we want Express to pass that data and set it on the rec.body object. So at the top here, I am just going to add a new thing. So tell the app to use, what is it? I think it's express.url encoded extended true, but that goes into an object. So we're telling Express it can accept URL encoded data, and any type of data can be sent in the form. And now anything we sent here, so this will be const data, I'll call it, will be in the rec body. And just to make sure this is working, I'm going to send the data straight back to the client so we can just see it in the web browser. So if I, let's see, I wanted, was it create note? I think I was. Yep, there we go. So if I go create note, note, stuff, and click create note this time to create the new note, I can see the request was successful and the response was just a JavaScript object that has the details. So title, note, content stuff. So back on my server where I'm using JavaScript, I'll be able to just access the contents of that form as a JavaScript object. Whoops. Okay. So I now know I have that data. The first thing I need to do is send that to my fake database here. So if I open that file back up, I'm going to call add note just to save that new note in there. So I'll say this is my data, database.addNote, and pass in the data. And realistically, you'd want to do some data sanitization, make sure that good data was passed in, that all the things you needed were passed in. But just for this basic app, I'm going to ignore all of that and just add it into the database. So on this side, I just need that little bit of logic to add it into the array. So this is going to be, let's see, notes.push, my new note object. But I don't actually want to pass in just the title and the contents. I also want an ID and a timestamp. So I'm going to create a new object here, and I'll just use object literal syntax straight into the push function. And I'm going to destructure the object straight into that object. So this is going to be the notes object, whatever was in here, or the note object rather. So in this case, it's just the title and the contents. And to that, I'm going to add an ID, and I'm just going to be really lazy and say it's the notes.length +1. So in this case, it'll be ID 3, then the next time will be ID 4. And I'm also going to add that timestamp, which is date.now. There we go. Okay. So given the title and the contents, let's create a new object that has title, contents, ID, timestamp, and push that into my notes array. So that should now work. That's great. And I don't want to res.send my data back. Once I've created a new note, I probably want to send the user back to my notes page. I want them to see the list of all of their notes, or maybe an individual note. I'm not sure which one. I'm going to send them back to the list of notes just because that seems fun right now. So I could render the notes.ejs page, but I don't want to duplicate my code here. And in some cases, my post request will have a different URL than my get requests. So it might not be nice to just render a page on a different URL like that. So a better technique might be to redirect the user back to the /notes route. So here in my get request to /notes, this is where I want to send the user to. So I'll say that I want to res.redirect the user to /notes, just like that. So now I can go to the create note page, create a new note, make a post request to /notes, add that into the database, and then redirect the user straight back to the /notes route where it should render a list of all those notes. So let's see how this goes. Let's put in create note, new note, some contents. Okay. I'm going to click create. This should make the post request and we should see the new note. There we go. So all of that happened really quickly. If we look at the HTTP request though, I can see that the first request was a post request to /notes that sent that information in the form. And then we got back a 302 status code, and this is a redirect. So this is the server telling the browser in this case that everything was successful, but in order to find the next thing that you need, in this case the notes page, you're going to need to make another HTTP request. So it makes a new request to the server to get all of the notes, and then that's 200 OK, and we see all of the notes here. So a redirect just tells the client that it needs to make another request to a different endpoint, whichever one we specify in the redirect. So this is a really cool thing to be able to use. There's one more thing that we should add to this page, which is actually a link to create a new note. So in my notes page, just at the very bottom, I'll create that new link that goes back to the server to create new note. Okay. So now if I refresh this page, there's a create new note link, which can go here, and I can actually start creating new notes. Remember though, that this note right here is just stored in memory because it's not a real database. So as soon as I refresh the server, so if I had some logic here and I hit save and it restarts the server, anything in memory is going to go out of memory. So now if I refresh this page, that node is gone. That isn't a bug, that is because I'm only storing things in memory. So keep that in mind right now, this is just all in memory. So now that we can create new notes, let's add the ability to delete a note. So if I go and view more of a note and I decide that I don't like it, maybe I want to be able to delete that. So within the single note page, so single note right here, I want to add a link, kind of like this, to delete a note. And I could make an endpoint here that's like, I don't know, delete note. I could even pass in the ID of that single note, but this will make a GET request. I mean, it's nice to just have a link there, but it will make a GET request which shouldn't have any side effects. It shouldn't modify any resources or delete my resource in this case. So instead of doing this as a GET request, we need to do this as a POST request, but without using client-side JavaScript, we have to create a form to create a POST request. And we only have two options when we're not using client-side JavaScript, and that is GET and POST. So anything that where we're getting data and we're not modifying any resources, there are no side effects, we can use a GET request. Anything else must be a POST request in this case. So instead of a link, I'm going to create a form for a POST request. I'm actually going to create this URL a little bit differently. I'm going to make a delete, or a POST request rather, to /notes/ the ID of the note /delete, just because I like that syntax a little bit better. So in this case, the ID is going to be dynamic. It's going to be whatever the note.id is, like that. So /notes/ the ID of the note /delete will delete the note. And before I add anything else in here, I'm just going to go to my server and make that endpoint. So app.post to /notes/ and the ID is going to be dynamic. So anything can be passed in here, and then /delete. So anything that matches this will be the delete request to delete a note. Rec res. And again, the ID is going to be whatever is passed into rec.params.id, and I need this to be a number. So it's just like the other POST request. Okay, so in my single note, really all I need in this form is a submit button. So I'll just say button type, there we go, submit, and just write delete note. Okay, so on my page, that will look like this, which, you know, you could style differently with CSS. I'm just going to leave it for now. But if I click this, it's going to make that POST request to delete /ID/note. So back on my server, I need to handle this POST request to actually delete the note. So on my database, I'm going to call database.delete note and pass in the ID. And here, okay, there we go. So pass in an ID. I need to now modify my notes array. So maybe I should make this let so I can modify it. There we go. Yeah, that seems fine. So there's many ways of deleting an item out of an array. I could use splice or slice. I think it would be more fun to use filter. Why not? So I'm gonna set notes to be notes.filter. And again, if you want to know, if you're not familiar with filter or some of the array methods, I'd recommend just Googling, checking out the MDN docs and looking more into this. But basically, filter will create a brand new array from an existing array, but only where the items match some sort of criteria. So as long as the note in the array, as long as the ID does not equal this ID, it can exist in the new array. But if the ID does equal the notes ID, then I'm going to not add it to the new array. So I'm basically creating a brand new array that only has the items where the ID doesn't match, which, in this case, let's see, if I'm deleting note 1, means every note stays in the array except for note 1. Of course, if this was a real database, I'd have a query to actually delete it out of the database, but this is good enough for now. So I'm back in server, I've deleted it out of there, and I guess I'm going to do the same thing that I did before. Once you delete a note, let's just redirect straight back to that notes page. That seems like a good idea. Okay, so that should now work. So if I click delete note, ooh, this is going to delete it. There it is, it's gone. So my notes array now only exists of second note. If I view more and delete that, I now have no notes. That's so sad, but I could create a new note. Or, because that deletion was only in memory, if I restart my server and go back, I can see the notes array exists just of those 2 notes that I have hard-coded into the array. But we now have, we have notes. I can view them, I can delete them, I can create a new one. I can then delete the new one. No, that was a second note. Oh, why did that happen? View more. Oh. because the IDs, because I lazily created the IDs, that's bad, isn't it? So this has an ID of 2, but this also has an ID of 2 because of the way I created the ID. So maybe I should do a better job there. But it is working. I just wrote some bad JavaScript when I created the IDs in my database. Whoops, I should create like an incrementer. Actually, I could fix that now. That's an easy fix. Let's go to my database. I'll just set my current ID equals 3. Because I currently, my ID is 2, so the next one is going to be 3. And then when I actually create my ID here, where did I do that? Create? No, there it is. Instead of setting it to the length, I'll set it to the current ID, and then I'll increment the current ID. There we go. Okay. So now if I mean, that was pointless because this isn't real database, but whatever. This should now work. Yay, okay. Just proving that I know JavaScript. All right, so I'm going to delete this note. There we go. So we can create, view, and delete notes. Awesome. This is pretty much a CRUD app. Pretty much. So to make it a full CRUD app, we could update the notes, but I'm going to skip over that part because it's basically the same as the stuff we've already done. There is one more thing that I want to add that is a little bit different, and I want to be able to search for a note. So if I have a list of hundreds of notes here, I want a little search bar so that I can search for a specific one or filter based on some sort of search criteria. So to start with that, in my notes page, I'm just going to add a form at the top here. Form, and we're going to have a label. Call this search. I'm going to have an input type text. Yep, and then a button that just says search. So 4 is going to be my search input. That's going to be the ID I use. And then the name, I'll just call this search term. Maybe just, yeah, search term's fine. Okay, so now I have a form. It's not going anywhere just yet. But let's see, how does that look? Yeah, okay, so now if I search in here, I want to filter based on that. So I need an action in here. And what I'm going to do is actually make this a GET request to /posts. And that already exists. That already exists on my server. It's right here. And I'm just going to continue using this route because basically I want to stay on the same page. This search feature is doing this. It's going to get the notes and render the notes. I just need to be able to filter the notes based on some sort of search criteria. So if I refresh my page and I run this, let's say I search for, I don't know, cat. There's a lot of cat stuff. And hit search. Let's look at the HTTP request. Let's look at what happens here. So by default, cannot get /posts. Why is it trying to get /posts? Oh, whoops, not posts, notes. My fault. Ha, thought I was dealing with a different app. Okay, so let's do cat again. Let's try that again, hit search. Okay, so it's making the GET request to /notes, just as before. And it's a GET request by default because I didn't specify that this form has to be a POST request. We could be explicit here. I could say that the method is GET, but by default, GET. But by default, it's going to be a GET request, so that's fine. So it's making that GET request to /notes, and it's displaying all the notes just as it was. But the search term is in the URL. Because a GET request doesn't have a body, it just sends all the data as part of the URL, as part of this query parameter here. So you get a question mark, and then any bits of information in the form are going to be sent after that. So this is part of the URL, and we can access it on the server with, let's see, /notes, rec.query, because this is a query parameter, and then whatever the name is. So I called it name search term. So whatever search term is going to be. There we go. So const search term equals. So this is going to be the value. In this case, it's going to be the value cat because that's what was sent in here. So now, basically what I'm going to do is pass that search term to my database. I'm going to let the database handle this logic, and then we're just going to render whatever notes the database gives us. So right now that's all of the notes, but back in my fake database file, when I go to get all the notes, I'm going to allow a search term to be passed in, and let's see, I'll do 2 things. So if there is no search term, let's return all the notes, right? If there's no search term, just return all of the notes. But if there is a search term, we're only going to return notes. I'm going to filter again. where, let's see, what do we want here? Where the note.title contains, includes, what is it? Includes the search term. Search term, there we go. Or the note.contents includes the search term. Again, if this was like, I mean, just for reference, if you know how to use SQL, for example, you know, this would be like select star from notes where title like percent, and then you'd have to like pass in the parameter as a query parameter. So, you know, this is just simulating what it would be for an actual database, but I don't want to implement that right now. So I'm just using filter. So this should work. If there's a search term, we'll return only the notes that contain that in the title or the contents. Otherwise, we'll return all the notes. So back in my server, this is all working. Pass that to notes, and then we'll render the same page, the exact same page. We don't need a new page, but only the notes that match that search criteria. So let's refresh. And let's, I mean, both of them are going to have cat. So if I type in cat and search, it's going to give me both of them. If I go for first, it's actually going to give me nothing. This is interesting. Feature of JavaScript. Because I'm checking for equality of the strings, and I put in first, but if I look back at my notes, if I go back, I can see that it's a capital F. So the way I've built this, you know, you could code around this. I'd actually have to match it exactly. So I'll search, and I can see that if I put in first, I get my first note. If I put in second, I get my second note. If I put in no search criteria and hit search, then that's null on the server. So, or probably an empty string actually. So we get all the notes because it's filtering based on nothing. So that's it. We now have search as well. And that's the last feature I'm going to implement in this application. We now have a web server that is serving up these HTML files that allow us to create, delete, and search through different nodes. From here, you could try connecting a real database. You could try adding user authentication, so you could have notes for different users that come to your app. And I'll leave some links in the description for other resources that you can use to find more information about building on top of applications like this. If you made it this far into the video, please leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of this video, and if you want to see videos on anything else. And if you want to see my videos pop up on your YouTube feed, hit that subscribe button.